Yeah, I couldn't afford the copyright strike for this video, so just all use your imaginations on the rest of the song. Yeah, you'll know how it goes by now. Yeah. Okay, well, here's the video.
Woof woof! Hey guys, it's me Marcus, aka the Mad Dog, and we're back with another video. Written by Charles Soule and illustrated by Giuseppe Camuncoli, and no, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, and I don't mean any disrespect if I said it wrong. The first issue was Star Wars Darth Vader, in case you confused it with Of Mice and Men Darth Vader, was published by Marvel Comics in June of 2017, with the 25th and final issue being released in December of 2018. And Darth Vader's now risen. Born out of the flames of Mustafar, he now has a point to prove after his defeat at the hands of Obi Wan Kenobi, and the holes in Order 66 are starting to become apparent. Respect isn't enough and the galaxy must fear the Dark Lord of the Sith. But with faith in Lord Palpatine in question, and the echoes of Vader's previous life as Anakin following his every move, how can the Empire reign and become the most dominant force in the Republic? The art's pretty decent, I'd give it a 6 or 7 out of 10, it's just that I preferred it in the Kieran Gillen series that I'd read before this. And I'm not sure if I've seen any of Camuncoli's work before, but it does get the job done here. I just felt that given the story that this was telling and the place that it found itself in within the Star Wars universe, it probably would have benefited from not having such a cartoony style. The sharper, more photorealistic look that Salvador Larroca brought to the table would have probably benefited this story more. And that's not me saying that the art's bad, I think that if this would have been in the mainline Star Wars story, that probably would have worked better, and I just feel that tonally this wasn't the best choice for a Darth Vader book. In saying that though, there are some quite funny comedic moments in this, and I think it really works because of the timing of the art and the way that it's positioned, and also the action is great. If there's one aspect that you need to get right in a Star Wars book, it's probably going to be that, so at least it does tick that box. Especially in the opening issues, I found myself really enjoying the art, and there was a moment where I felt like it could have been on par with the other Darth Vader series, while still being different enough to have its own sense of style. The design of some of these Jedis that had gone into hiding, and some of the races that were created were really interesting to look at, and the ships were illustrated with such detail that it was really fascinating to see in those early issues. Where it changed for me and impacted my overall opinion of the art was probably during the Burning Seas arc. Now I can see some people really enjoying this style, but particularly in these issues, I just felt that it wasn't as good as it was during the beginning. It does seem that there was a bit of a rush on to get these issues out, maybe they were coming out twice a month in some cases, but at the same time I wish it would have taken a bit more of a break just to make sure that it was as polished as it was at the beginning. When we return to Mustafar for the final arc, I do feel that the art does step itself up again. It is more in line to the early issues than it was during Burning Seas, so I did actually have a good time towards the end of the book. It was just that some of those middle issues had this really weird sort of 2D 90s look to them, and if that would have been intentional throughout, it would have made a bit more sense, but for me it just felt like a bit of an anomaly. I actually had to stop and check that it was the same artist, and it does look that at a certain point he just took over doing like the layouts and the pencils, so maybe that's just what caused the difference. The paneling was a major highlight of the art, and it's something that I really want to put the spotlight on when I do talk about books, because here it was utilised in a more creative way, and it was clear that it wasn't afraid of mixing things up so it could give something a more Hollywood-like feel, or to linger on a more important moment, or to just make it a bit more dynamic. So maybe I'm being a bit more harsh on the art than what is necessary, but I think when I've just looked at other Star Wars books and we've got artists like Larroca, Cassidy, Immonen, it just feels that this wasn't really up to the same standard that I've seen before. But at the same time, the art's never really bad. I had a really good time with this book, and I've read a few things from Soule in the past, but when a writer gets on a Star Wars book, they tend to take it up a notch. And before we do get into the bulk of this review, I do just want to throw out a disclaimer that I am pretty much a casual Star Wars fan. I've watched pretty much all the movies, I've read some of the modern Marvel comics, but I'm not really into the expanded universe. I'd like to be, and it's something that I am slowly getting into, but if I didn't realise that a character that's in a background of a panel in this book was actually in episode 19 of season 5 of the Clone Wars, just allow it, because I'm not going to lose any sleep if you whinge about it in the comment section below. So for me this was a really interesting book because it was set between episodes 3 and 4, which I think is just an interesting time period that I've never really explored that much. And it does mean that Soule's run is actually set before Gillen's, which was a little bit jarring at first. But then I remembered that that's the beauty of Star Wars, that you don't always have to follow it in order, and in fact a lot of fans actually recommend that you don't. But all a Star Wars title has to do is tell you an interesting story, and I think that this definitely does that. But if you're interested in picking up this book, or maybe the upcoming reprint of the Kieran Gillen run, you can get them from the channel sponsor, Organic Price Books. They've got great packaging, fast shipping, and amazing customer services, and if you use code WOOFWOOF, you'll get $2 off your order. And if you you're ordering 3 or more books and you want them to be delivered together, make sure you use code WOOFWOOF ship it together for 5% off your entire order. Don't worry, you can just copy and paste them from the description down below and you can use these codes as many times as you like. And having this story centered around Vader coming to terms with his new responsibility and his status as a Sith, whilst trying to avenge his tarnished reputation because of the fact that he was defeated by Obi-Wan, opened the door for Vader to become this formidable yet somewhat vulnerable character. In the first couple of issues, especially before he's even got a lightsaber, it's as if he's trying to prove that he's tough in any way possible, in comparison to what we know and what we see later about Vader, where he doesn't even really have to make an effort. It was interesting seeing him fail quite a bit as well and grow into the role of a Sith, and also begin to control the dark side of the Force. There was just so much anger to the point where you could feel that you could still see Anakin beneath the mask. It did feel like he'd just come out of that final fight with Obi-Wan and that there was never really a stopgap between the two. There was no completely jarring change or that you felt like you didn't understand the character, and if there's one thing that you have to get right in a Darth Vader book, it's gonna be Darth Vader. As well, that anger acted like a bit of a through line, and as the book continued, it was great just seeing how Vader began to find this sense of peace and calm. He was still doing a lot of evil things, but at the same time he just wasn't doing it as angry. Because when I heard that this was set before A New Hope, I did wonder if it would diminish the mystique that did surround Darth Vader. Because that was the issue that some people had with the prequels, they did tell you too much about this character before you saw him and what you knew already. But then I thought back to myself and I realised that we've actually seen Darth Vader lose quite a lot of times in the original trilogy. But in A New Hope, once he loses the chase around the Death Star, he's never really the focus because it's more about Luke. And in Return of the Jedi, it's more about the emotional struggle that's going on between Luke and Vader. So this book was great because it gave me a chance to see Darth Vader fail and have to fight his way out of it. He was left to his own devices, and there was a lot of tests that Palpatine put throughout this just to see if Darth Vader was capable. And those early issues had me comparing this book to Vader Down from the Kieran Gillen run. And it was like looking at two different characters. You'd think at some point Anakin was taken out of the Vader suit and they just put somebody in who was more experienced. So it was great that this book got to show me something different than what I already know about Darth Vader, because pretty much everything else has pretty much followed the same trope. That he is this new invincible Sith who doesn't even need to think about what he's doing because he's so in control of the dark side of the Force. So I think this series does work quite well alongside the other Marvel titles that have come out already. Where I did find this book lacking though was in the other characters. There was no Dr. Aphra, even if I did find her quite a bit annoying at the beginning, or a real sense of a common foe for Vader to go up against. There were a few interesting characters that were scattered throughout this run, like Momin and Infala. Again, not sure if I'm pronouncing that right, but they just weren't in this book long enough. It kind of felt like after each arc they didn't realise how many issues they'd have to write, so they'd introduce something and they didn't know how long they could have it for or when it'd have to time up with something else. Like, it kind of felt a bit like me with Han in the Fast and Furious series, because do you remember when... As well, this run did actually diminish the impact of Order 66 quite a bit, because I was under the belief that it was just Obi-Wan and Yoda that had managed to survive. That was why it was such an impactful moment and why it's been referenced in so many other Star Wars media, because I just thought that this was pretty much the endgame for all the Jedi. Like, don't get me wrong, it was great because then we got to see Vader go up against these Jedi and there were some great fights throughout this book featuring them, but did the 66 represent like the percentage of the success rate, or like what's that about? Again, I can't be too harsh on it though, because it did give us those early issues and story arcs which were the most enjoyable parts of it. I'm not really going to have a spoiler section, I am just going to talk about the general arcs, but I'm going to be quite vague throughout it. But if you want to know absolutely nothing about this book, then there might be a few minor spoilers here and there, but I love when a story isn't afraid to take the time to flesh out a single aspect about a character, and in this particular case, it was the fact that Vader didn't have a lightsaber. And that was such an ordeal that we took for granted in the movies because of the fact that he just appears with it. And Vader was just on the warpath for this entire first arc, and it was just great seeing that he could make those mistakes and that he wasn't this seasoned veteran Sith that we knew. And you actually saw him learn from the mistakes that he did make in those early issues, and it just felt like it had this great sense of character progression that I didn't know would be possible because of the fact that it was set between two movies. There were moments scattered throughout the book as well where other characters would openly doubt Vader and slowly start to come around to his way of thinking, or maybe just feared him enough to not say anything against him. The Inquisitors were another high points of this series, and I like when they were introduced because of the fact that the book was at risk of going stale, but they just brought this new energy. Seeing Vader training them and having his authority questioned were some of the high points of this series, and that also extends to when Tarkin's in it. I like that Vader had this character that he had to answer to, and you could tell that he was really struggling with that kind of dynamic. All of these were major positives for this series. The Dying Light arc in general was just really good, and I felt it carried a lot of the same momentum as the one that came before it. It also felt like the turning point where any remnants of Vader caring about the Jedi were just gone now, and I think that's why this book shifts tonally quite a bit after this. That struggle between what he was taught by Obi-Wan and what he's being told by Palpatine is just no longer there anymore, except for a few moments where he's meditating and in a few kind of interesting scenes. But you don't see Vader hesitate anymore, and it is important that that happens because that's the Vader that we all know and love. But I think that could have been a theme throughout the entire book, and by the end have it that he no longer cares about the Jedi. Don't let that go so early because it was really interesting, and I just wish I could have seen more of it. Then we have the Burning Seas arc, which I just felt went on for a little bit too long, probably what you're thinking about this video right now. It was also the point where I realised that this series just wasn't tight narratively throughout, and I think that's a difficulty in writing a book like this because of the fact that you can't change too much, you can't go too far off the path because of the fact that we know that Vader's going to be a certain character by the time that we get to episode 4. That's why I think that this was a real lull in this book, because of the fact that there was so much energy that came before it. And even in the first couple of issues of this arc, it felt like it had a really good pace and that it was going to go somewhere good. It was fun seeing the Empire trying to muscle the way into another planet, but we'd already experienced something similar when Vader was on his own earlier on in this book. So it felt like it was nothing new, but to give it credit, I did like seeing the different levels of the Empire and the way that they did try to negotiate a little bit, but you never really trusted them. And seeing the cracks beginning to form between Vader and the Empire because of the fact that he had difficulty getting used to that kind of level of bureaucracy, and there being that sense of helplessness for him in a similar way that he must have felt when he didn't get the rank of Jedi Master. So I did like those parallels there, but I just think that overall this arc could have been a couple of issues shorter. But then the book closes with Fortress Vader, and if I was a bit meh at Burning Seas, this definitely stepped it up a level. Momin was a great character that I wish would have been featured throughout this series a bit more, and maybe he was. I'm a bit of a dumb reader, so he might have been in the background quite a bit and I just didn't pick it up at first. But this was where the most character development for Vader took place since those early issues. I loved the process of him rejecting these designs and these proposals whilst there's a war against the people of Mustafar just going on behind his back and he doesn't even really pay much attention to it. This is what I'm saying, whereas before he would have focused more on the war than the empire-y stuff that's going on. Now he's just more focused on building himself a palace so that he doesn't have to bother with anyone. So yeah, I guess that's the development. Vader just couldn't care less. This arc had a great concept, build-up, development and conclusion, even if it wasn't surprising in the slightest. And admittedly, for as much praise as I've shown the Kieran Gillen run throughout this video, which is something that I should probably go back and do a review of, I can't really remember the ending of that book. It might have even peaked at Vader Down and I'm just looking at it with rose-tinted glasses. But I do remember the ending of this, and not because it's shocking or poignant, but just because it was fun. And in hindsight, as I'm looking back on this series, I think it's interesting that it didn't feature too many of the movie universe characters. And it's a similar praise that I gave James Tinian's Batman run that I reviewed recently, because it's not about Vader going on some kind of revenge mission against Obi-Wan or trying to hunt down Yoda, but it focused more on that defeat and what it meant to Vader's earlier career. And it might have felt more, ironically, forced if it would have gone in that direction, especially with how grand of a scheme Palpatine had and how just wide and expansive this universe is. If anything, it was just cool seeing Vader make the rest of the galaxy pay for the state that Obi-Wan left him in. Oh, as well, there's an annual in this book, and I'm not sure when it was released, but it must have been coming out around a similar time as Rogue One, and I could just skip this issue and not really know anything different. This is my final verdict, and Star Wars is a fascinating universe to me. I grew up on the movies, vividly remember seeing the prequels in cinema. Don't take me for that, I can't help the fact that I was born in 1993, but at the same time, it's a universe that I've not actively sought to know more about. Besides Dark Empire and some of the Clone Wars stuff, I was content with what the movies had shown me. But then when Marvel started printing Star Wars books, I started to pay a bit more attention. And when looking at Charles Soule's run on Darth Vader, it's just a shame that I'd read Kieran Gillen's take on the character before this. I wish I could erase experiences from my mind, like it would really help me to not hate high school as much, and I'd also probably be raving about Charles Soule's run on Darth Vader as much as the majority of people are. But unfortunately, I do find myself thinking that this isn't the best Star Wars content that I've read recently, or even the best Darth Vader title that I've read recently. Sure, it's unfair to compare, but at the same time, that's what everybody does when a new Star Wars movie comes out. If this was named something else and it didn't have all the recognisable characters, I'd probably be giving this a much higher recommendation, because at its core, Darth Vader by Charles Soule is a really enjoyable book. It still tells a great and intriguing story about the Dark Lord of the Sith at a point in his life that is often overlooked. And my criticisms of the book, like some of the pacing and what I'm comparing it to that I've read before, might feel a bit unfair, but at the same time, that's kind of the blessing and the curse that comes with being part of a universe. So if you are planning on picking up this book, I do definitely recommend it for Star Wars fans or people who are wanting a bit of a Darth Vader fix. And I probably made the mistake and got caught up in the hype of this because I was expecting something that stood apart from everything Star Wars that had come before this. Whereas in actual fact, I probably would have had a better time if I had just treated this like the next piece of a puzzle that I'm just getting now. And in that respect, if I approach it from that way, it is a great book that really builds on the legacy of Star Wars and also brings a bit of its own take to the table. And I've got to respect it for that, because it is a great time, even if out of all of these titles it doesn't really have the high ground. So I would recommend picking this up and checking it out for yourself if you do want a bit more of a casual Star Wars read. And I'm going to give this a modest score of 70%. Woof woof! So that's my review, and if you've read this book, let me know what you think about it in the comment section below. Share this video where you can, because it does really help the channel. But until next time, whenever that may be, just make sure that you stay safe. And stay mad, all you dogs. Woof woof! See you at the next video.